morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report. This is the YouTube show dedicated to bringing you thoughts and breakdowns of all wrestling news, topics, and weekly events. If you are tuning in for the first time, thank you. We have uploads on this channel twice a week. We've got the Monday edition that features a look at the top news articles in the wrestling market, as well as weekend events. And on Fridays, we have the FSWR Review Series, which are shows that cover MLW and NXT reviews for the week. And eventually added to that list will be AEW's TV show in October. If you like what you hear today, and you want to hear more content from the FSWR in the future, make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to keep updated on video posts, and leave your feedback down in the comments section regarding any or all topics discussed here. Also, give this video a like if you don't mind. It'd be really helping me out here to grow this channel and get more eyeballs. Anyway, got a decent handful of material to cover in a short amount of time, so let's get going. A very interesting and broad week of wrestling, to say the very least. Well, here's a guy who made the news bulletin this week, Chris Jericho, and everything surrounding Jericho's worldwide investigation of the stolen AEW World Heavyweight Championship. By now, I think everyone's heard the news in some way, shape, or form. Last Sunday, which would have been the 1st of September, Jericho had filed a police report of his stolen AEW World title. According to the police report, the victim reported the theft of his championship wrestling belt while he was eating inside Longhorn Steakhouse, the report says. The victim stated he arrived at the Millionaire Club Airport terminal and placed the belt inside of his rented limousine. The limo driver shuttled the victim to Longhorn for dinner. The victim remained at Longhorn while the limo driver returned to the airport. The victim had taken the wrong luggage from the airport, and the driver took it back to the terminal. When the driver picked up the victim from the restaurant, the belt was missing. Responding officers searched the limo and airport for the belt without success. On call, CID was consulted, and forensics responded to the scene. So that was the report. And on the following Wednesday, it was reported that the championship was found, quote here, on the side of the road in Tallahassee, Florida. And this led to some brief controversy over how Tallahassee police handled the situation, including a leaked photo of an officer holding up the belt, only to have that post deleted and reopen the case, despite the fact that the belt was presumably already located. This also led to some great publicity from food chain corporations such as Arby's, who tweeted, "Hey, at I Am Jericho, heard some Judas stole your championship belt. We've got plenty of cardboard. Want a new one?" And apparently all of this led to Longhorn Steakhouse being a top trend on Twitter. And among the fast food chains that did take part in this matter, Cracker Barrel was not among the chains, which is quite astonishing, actually. Now, obviously, when you look at this whole fiasco in a nutshell, this was a complete and unmitigated disaster from the jump. Jericho legitimately had the AEW World title stolen from him 3 days after he won the thing in Chicago at AEW's All Out pay-per-view. And because Jericho was awesome, and because AEW were quick to think on their feet here, they ended up turning a real-life predicament into a storyline. So we get the video of Jericho cutting a promo in his hot tub while drinking bubbly, and while everyone's talking about the hilarity of Jericho drinking bubbly sparkling water, I'm sitting there laughing at the fact that the dude is wearing his scarf in the water. Anyway, there's a lot of material to digest from this. I think the big question everyone is still asking, though, is how much of the story is fake and how much of the story is real? And based on the application of practical logic, here's what we know is real about this situation. Obviously, we know the belt was stolen. You can't file a false police report without being subjected to a misdemeanor or prison time. And clearly, AEW was not going to intentionally put their world champion in harm's way of facing real criminal charges for the sake of a storyline. Maybe if this were WCW 2000, we might have seen them do something stupid like this to have one of their guys file a false police report. But AEW is not that stupid. We also know that Jericho has now regained possession of the title. And with that, it also appears that the storyline has pretty much been dropped. Actually, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say it's been dropped, because that makes it sound like they're forgetting about it entirely. I would venture a guess that it has been temporarily resolved, and we'll maybe receive more word about it as we get closer to AEW's TNT debut. But there are some follow-up questions that I do have regarding this matter that I think are interesting. If they are going to continue this storyline in the future for TV, then why have they already announced Jericho's next title defense for their November pay-per-view? And against Cody, no less. Cody's a babyface. Plus, he has no incentive to steal Jericho's championship title. And if it turns out that this storyline really has been dropped altogether, why so hasty to blow it off? Why not develop it as a long-term whodunit angle? Maybe to build up something for their TV debut. I mean, let's not forget, the first 2 to 3 weeks of AEW's run on TNT are extremely crucial for their product. They're going to need to hit on all cylinders to bring in new eyeballs to the product and keep people's attention. And I imagine that one of the ways they can build up intrigue for those shows is to shoot a series of angles to find out who stole Chris Jericho's AEW world title. And the other big question I have here is sort of a half comedic, half serious question. If the rumors are true, then this was not a replica belt that Jericho had stolen. This was the real deal, apparently. Which then leads to my question. Why on God's green earth would you have Jericho walking around with the real world title and not a replica belt? This is according to SB Nation. We know the belt was constructed by legendary designer Dave Milliken, who designs the majority of the belts in professional wrestling, as well as championship belts for the UFC. In a 2014 interview with CNN, he explained that replica basic belts cost roughly $1,000, with top-end WWE replicas selling for as much as $10,000. A redacted police report lists the belt at being worth between $20,000 and $100,000. I don't know whether I should laugh or scream. There is a certain level of incompetence regarding this whole matter that if it turns out that this whole thing from start to finish is a 100% shoot, then AEW might be the dumbest wrestling promotion of all time. For the life of me, I just can't envision the idea that AEW would not only have Jericho win their inaugural world championship in the main event of their pay-per-view, but then proceed to let the man leave the building with the actual title belt, only to then turn around and have Jericho have the belt stolen from him the next night at a chain restaurant. How does that even happen? I don't know, man. I do hope we revisit this talking point soon, because there are so many unanswered questions here that would make Vince Russo's head spin out of control. All right, moving on here. This past week, Ric Flair did an interview with TMZ Sports in which he discussed a deal he has been trying to negotiate with WWE regarding the trademark of his man catchphrase. The idea being here that Flair would be okay with WWE referring to Becky Lynch as the man on their programming, provided Flair would be reimbursed and paid a certain sum of money for the use of the term that he trademarked during his heyday. According to reports that came out later, Vince McMahon declined Flair's initial offer, which led to Flair going behind his back and issuing a legal form to trademark and take full ownership for the man catchphrase. This has also led to Ric's daughter Charlotte becoming angry with him over the lawsuit threat, and Flair had this to say about it during his interview with TMZ. "My daughter Charlotte is so mad at me because I filed not even understanding. It's not with Becky. I have no beef with Becky. Even if I won, the trademark, Becky can have it all day long. I'm glad, but I want the company, WWE, to pay me for it because I'm going to take care of my family." So at the end of the day, what does this really boil down to? Easy. Money and ego. Flair wants compensation for a nickname that he helped establish for himself in a previous era to appease his ego. The problem is that WWE attorneys clearly understand that Flair does not have any grounds for a case here. First of all, most Ric Flair fans will always recognize Flair as the Nature Boy, which is a gimmick that he inherited from the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. But Ric never referred to himself as the man. His catchphrase was always, "To be the man, you've got to beat the man." But Flair was not actively referring to himself as the man on a week-to-week basis during his prime. In fact, there was a period of time where he actually referred to himself as God in his promos, especially in his more off-the-wall promos in TNA. And you can go back and listen to those for further verification. Becky is a different case here, because the WWE are actively attempting to coin her as the man. And biological discrepancies aside, most people now recognize Becky with this moniker. But there might also be a bigger issue at play here. And Solomonster's Sounds Off podcast from this week brilliantly analyzed Ric Flair's financial dilemmas in great detail, basically insinuating that perhaps Flair's financial status may be one of the reasons that he's jumping aboard this dispute over phrase trademarking. Let me read you something from an article at Heavy.com. This article came out just this past May. It's called Ric Flair Net Worth 2019, 5 Facts You Need to Know. And the article is a real eye-opener to what Flair's monetary status really equates to when you look at it on a larger scale. According to Pro MMA reports, at Flair's career peak, he made $700,000 per year. $700,000 per year. This in comparison to equivalent big-name wrestling stars such as Stone Cold Steve Austin, who made an estimated $5 to $12 million annual income for the WWF at his peak, and John Cena, who earned an estimated $8 million during his peak in 2005 and 2006. As of now, here is the list of net worth according to household names in the pro wrestling market. The Rock, net worth of $280 million. Stone Cold Steve Austin, net worth of $30 million. John Cena, net worth of $55 million. Hulk Hogan, net worth of $25 million. And then we have Ric Flair. Estimated net worth, $3 million. And this is according to Celebrity Net Worth. But there are other factors here that we have to take into account. This is a continuation of the article. Quote, he was accused of failing to pay $1 million in spousal support to his ex-wife in 2013. For those of you that are unsure, alimony payments are predetermined sums of income that a spouse has to pay following a divorce or separation. Some people have one, possibly 2 of these payments to make in their lives. Ric Flair had 4 of them. According to the reports, he separated from his most recent wife, Jackie Beams, in 2011 and was ordered to pay her $4,000 a month in spousal support, in addition to $15,000 in legal fees. According to the Sportster, however, Flair did not honor their agreement and was forced to rectify the situation when Beams accused him of owing her over $1 million in spousal support. Flair's third wife, Tiffany Vandemark, also incurred debt during their marriage, which added strain to the wrestler's lifestyle. Grantler reports that she owed creditors $754,948 by the time they separated in 2009. I mean, you want to talk about adding salt to the wound. The accumulation of current familial debt on top of having to pay over triple the initial alimonies. And yes, Ric Flair is on record accrediting the whole fiasco to having to help pay for his son's medical bills when he was in the hospital. But still, that's a wide gap in initial fees over the subsequent fees that Flair had to pay. Here's something else. His online company, Ric Flair Finance, filed for bankruptcy in 2008. The company never legally owned a broker license, and it was shut down a year after its launching operation for non-compliance. And not only did they file for bankruptcy, but according to the reports here, Porter sued Flair for $115,000 on a $140,000 loan that was, you guessed it, unpaid. Here's another big financial hit to Flair. The IRS began seizing his WWE earnings in 2005 as a means of paying off back taxes. According to the Bleacher Report, Flair did not pay taxes for the years 1982, 1983, and 1988. By the time the IRS came to collect in 1990, Flair had already had a $62,000 back tax. And then after it was paid off, the IRS were back on him again in 2000. The federal government then issued what is called a lien, which for those of you that don't know, it's a way for the government to secure ownership of personal property until a debt or obligation is paid off in full. They issued one on Flair's estate for $874,000, which then led to the IRS seizing Flair's WWE earnings in 2005 in order to pay off the debts. Speaking of paying off debts, this has also led to Flair being forced to sell off his memorabilia as collateral damage, basically. In 2008, Flair signed a financing agreement with Con Bracco as collateral for $185,000 he owed the company. He was forced to sell off 2 of his championship belts, as well as wrestling gear, a Rolex given to him by Shawn Michaels, and framed magazine covers. And this article covers more ground on Flair's fiscal hits in recent years. 2011, order for contempt and arrest for failure to pay High Spots Incorporated $35,000 for merchandise. In 2016, on the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast, he said that at one point he borrowed $800,000 from Vince McMahon and had to pay him back with a WrestleMania paycheck. So what does this all mean? What does this all have to do with Flair potentially suing Becky Lynch for trademark infringement? Well, you want my honest opinion? I think Solomonster's right. I think Flair is financially desperate right now, and he's in dire need of income. And if that means doing something as silly and juvenile as going after a trademark catchphrase that Flair himself did not even trademark from his prime in the 80s, and that's what he's going to do. I don't know what comes of this in the future. All I know is that I did a lot of research regarding this whole Ric Flair matter. I always knew the dude struggled with money in the past, but I had no idea it was this much in depth. And while on the surface of the topic seems merely like an ego play, I think there's something deeper that only a handful of people are discussing here. All right, So coming up this Sunday, we've got WWE Clash of Champions from the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. As I'm looking at the card right now, we have 11 matches announced for the show, which does not include pre-show matches. So I don't know if they're going to add a few matches to the pre-show, if they're bumping a couple of the currently announced matches to the pre-show. No clue what's going on here, but as of now, we've got 11 announced matches for the card. We've got Bayley versus Charlotte Flair for the SmackDown Women's Championship. Obviously, Charlotte's going to be massively over in front of the North Carolina crowd. And I have not watched Raw or SmackDown. I think I saw recently that they turned Bayley heel, which was smart. Anyway, I would expect Charlotte to be the babyface throughout the match anyway. Probably putting her over. Although it's WWE, they usually like to bury people in their hometown, so maybe Bayley retains. We've got Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman versus Bobby Roode and Dolph Ziggler for the Raw tag titles. Obviously, the match is just a formality to get the belts off of Strowman and Rollins to set up their program for later in the night. As far as Roode and Ziggler go, I don't really know why they're doing the makeshift pairing of throwing two random singles guys together when they've already got like 8 legit tag teams to work with on the main roster, but whatever. At least Roode might finally get to do something interesting. We've got Seth Rollins versus Braun Strowman for the Universal title. Not really sure what they're going to do with that one. I think the real talking point about the title picture right now is what they have planned for Hell in a Cell. Apparently, Bray Wyatt is getting a championship match inside the cell. So I'm not really sure who they go with here. I mean, both guys are babyfaces last I checked, so unless Braun turns heel or something, I really see it going either way. I'm of the opinion that if they are going to do the Bray Wyatt title match in October, which I think it's still way too early to do the match, but if they are going to do it, they've got to have Bray win the title. And I don't see much of a point in having Braun win the belt if he's just going to end up dropping it in a month anyway. So I think Seth's retaining here. Kofi Kingston versus Randy Orton for the WWE Championship. As long as they don't do a stupid DQ finish like they did at SummerSlam, I'm fine with whatever they do here finish-wise. I still think Kofi would benefit more by getting the win over Randy, but it's WWE. Who knows what they'll do. We have Drew Gulak, Humberto Carrillo, and Lance Dorado in a 3-way for the Cruiserweight title. I don't see that match happening on the main card, so it'll probably be one of the ones that get bumped to the pre-show. We've got New Day versus The Revival for the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. Should be a fun match. People were raving about that New Day Revival Orton 6-man from Raw a couple weeks back, so I don't see why this wouldn't be any good. Shinsuke Nakamura versus The Miz for the Intercontinental title. Not really much to say there. Don't have an opinion one way or another who goes over. WWE might be trying to set a tie-breaking record with Miz for most IC title reigns with Jericho, who has 9 reigns, I believe. So if they're destined to top Jericho's record down the road, Miz is the closest guy to do it with. So I could see them putting the belt on Miz here just to spite Jericho in AEW. Becky Lynch versus Sasha Banks for the Raw Women's Championship. Sasha just returned. She turned heel. She's got a relatively new look. You've got to think she's winning the belt here, right? Makes sense. Which is why they'll probably have Becky retain. Either that or they'll do some lame DQ finish or something so that Becky doesn't have to drop the belt and they don't have to beat Sasha. Which then begs the question of, if you don't want to beat them, why put the match together? Good question. Glad I thought of it. Roman Reigns versus Eric Rowan in the second worst feud of 2019 behind Conan and Selena De La Renta's revenge porn angle. Dude, I don't even know anymore. I watched a couple clips of the angle. Here's basically what I know. Roman got killed with plunder backstage, but then didn't. Roman Reigns blamed people for doing it, but they didn't. Roman had an awesome match with Buddy Murphy on SmackDown, which I did watch. Then Eric Rowan and Daniel Bryan did it, but they didn't. And now I don't even know what's going on. But somehow we've got to this point, and I don't know if the idea is to do Bryan versus Reigns down the road. If it is, this is the most convoluted, obscure way of building up to a match I think I've ever seen in my life. I have no idea why they are delaying this for so long. They've got one more major pay-per-view this year, and it's Survivor Series, at least in terms of the big four shows they run. That's got to be where they blow the feud off, but even so, if they just stick them in one of those traditional Survivor Series tag matches, it's not like they're going to do the Reigns-Bryan blow-off match. And if they are going to do it by the end of the year, they're going to put it on one of those secondary pay-per-views. But again, why is this being delayed for so long? I can't conceive of a human species walking the planet Earth today that gives a crap about this match. It'll probably be slow. There will be a lot of rest holds. Roman will beat Rowan. Story continues. No one cares. And finally, we have Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross versus Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville for the women's tag titles. And, yeah, that's apparently happening. So there's your Clash of Champions card. Should be interesting. It'll be long, but I will review it on the show next week for the FSWR Monday edition. Oh, damn, I almost forgot about this too. They're apparently doing the finals of the King of the Ring tournament on that show as well. I've heard mostly positive feedback about the tournament so far. I also heard that Baron Corbin has been anticipated as one of the finalists, so stay tuned for that. Right, because if there is one thing that this Clash of Champions show really needs, with 10 matches already booked for the card, it is a Baron Corbin match. Enticing. All right. One thing that I stated during my breakdown of the Jim Cornette-Jordan Grace controversy is that I really don't like opinion articles. And the reason that I don't like opinion articles is that they usually turn out as hate pieces for authors to boast about their beliefs without providing any concrete detail or evidence to back up their claims as to why they feel a certain way. And I ended up dissecting an article that I thought really defined that problem when I went over the Cornette-Grace ordeal a couple weeks back. An author of a particular dirt sheet website clearly had a problem with Cornette said about Jordan, and instead of actually breaking down the content that Jordan had talked about in his podcast episode, the author simply vented personal frustrations online without providing anything to back up his claims. And the whole piece was, Jim Cornette's a bigot and he needs to be canceled. And the way I view it, I have no problem with people voicing their opinions online. While I certainly may not agree with every opinion out there, particularly in wrestling, I can at least respect people's points of views. And I also value the importance of conversation, which I think is something that we are missing in the world today. So this week there was another article that came out as a follow-up to the AEW All Out show from this past Saturday. And I want to talk about it for a bit because the piece is actually very interesting to me. And I actually do feel comfortable crediting the author here because it's not just a big hate speech. The article is from David Bixenspan at Deadspin, who I've actually credited in reports on this show before. And the article is all centered around wrestling fan bigotry and how wrestling companies need to set boundaries for their shows. Because according to Bixenspan's studies here, there seems to be a widespread epidemic of wrestling fans showing up at events and creating very volatile environments. The claim is that fans are being openly racist, they're being transphobic and anti-LGBTQ. And I find this interesting because while I in particular have not experienced this with the shows that I've watched, Apparently, there have been recent experiences of wrestling fan bigotry being displayed, up to and including shows that are run by the WWE. This is according to the August 12th edition of the Observer newsletter. Dave Meltzer reported that there had been complaints from some fans, which has gotten to NXT management, about bigoted fans' chants at some of WWE's NXT developmental circuit events, particularly the smaller shows in Florida that the newest recruits start out on. Recent incidents have included a fan giving a Nazi salute to German wrestler Marcel Bartel, and multiple fans starting some variation of a "Build That Wall" chant at Mexican wrestler Humberto Carrillo. There was consternation over the offending fans not being kicked out in that case, even after a "kick him out" chant from the attendees. And Bixen Span cites a couple other examples of some recent fan bigotry, particularly with the Nyla Rose stuff, which I'll talk about in a bit. But that was the first part of the article. And the second half deals with the idea of, well, what's the response to this? Should wrestling companies be banning hecklers? Should they ignore it? How do you respond to this kind of stuff? He says, quote, "It shouldn't be that difficult to police at independent shows and the Florida NXT card. Buildings and crowds are smaller than at arena shows, which makes it easier to find the offender, make an example of them, and kick them out. In wrestling, the UK independent turned WWE affiliate promotion Progress has a pretty clear message with their, quote, 'everyone is welcome' tagline, and, quote, 'don't be a,' insert genitalia part here, as their one rule. That rule is far from perfect and awfully vague, but it has generally served them pretty well, at least on the scale of a larger indie group. Various mainstream sports teams and leagues have fan codes of conduct, although not all are enforced equally well." So Bixen Span apparently reached out to WWE and AEW to try and get a word in on what the proper response should be to fan bigotry. And Nyla Rose chimed in with a rather ambiguous response to handling the matter. I won't read it verbatim, but her response is essentially treat others with respect, support one another, blah, blah, blah. Typical corporate cut and paste verbiage you hear all the time. WWE's response was very cut and dry, but again, it's very obtruse. Quote, "Crowd reaction is an important element of our shows. However, inappropriate fan conduct is not tolerated and is addressed by WWE immediately on site." So now we address the pink elephant in the room here. What is the proper way to handle wrestling fan bigotry? Well, first of all, we need to call it like it really is. The term is called heckling. Sure, some of it might have bigoted connotation, but that's what it really boils down to. It's fan heckling. And the fact of the matter is that whether we want to try and view this as a new phenomenon in the wrestling world, fan bigotry or fan heckling has been a thing for years. This is nothing new. It goes on in the current PG era of WWE. It dates back to the Ruthless Aggression era, the Attitude era, even the Hogan era in the 80s and 90s. If you really want to jump back in the time machine, you'll find plenty of fan heckling in a lot of territorial promotions from back in the day. And in fact, fan heckling was evident during the territorial days because wrestling was still in that weird transitional period where you still had people buying into the illusion that it was real. You'll hear plenty of horror stories with heels back in the day being threatened by fans in the parking lot, getting grabbed at and punched at live events, getting their tires slashed. All kinds of stuff happened back then. And it was even more evident to happen back then. So I think it's important to address. First of all, this whole idea of fan bigotry, it's not revolutionary. It's just that now we live in a time where this kind of activity is socially relevant and easy to target. The second thing we need to address, and this is where my Nyla Rose conversation comes into play, is what exactly are fans saying and doing at these events that deems it inappropriate, out of line, and narrow-minded? Well, according to the NXT ordeal, It sounds like fans are issuing a lot of racist and radical pro-Nazi chants. Now, obviously, because this is WWE, we're probably never going to see any of this stuff aired on television or posted online for viewing. If this kind of stuff really is happening at NXT tapings, that's awful, and shame on the people who are instigating that kind of behavior. And in another instance, which we actually do have a visual of, this is apparently something that took place at an independent show run by Battle Club Pro. A heckler makes a repugnant comment about a DC logo on a wrestler's pair of boots. The promoter gets on the mic, and he has security kick the guy out of the building. So here we have an instance where a company is acting on these kinds of situations and removing hecklers from their events. Here is the problem with the early part of this article. A lot of the latter material in the report stems from the early discussion of fan outburst from Nyla Rose winning the Casino Battle Royal at the All Out event and being one of the competitors to challenge for the AEW Women's Championship, despite being a biological male. And let me read some of this, just to show you where I think Bixen Span is speaking purely through emotional rationalizing and not through factual evidence. Quote, Nyla Rose is trans, and while AEW has not pushed that element of her persona at all on its shows, the fact of it still elicited a dumb, bigoted backlash out of the worst kind of fans. That kind of resentment that had followed Rose at a lower level in the past. Unquote. Okay, let's stop right there. Question. What exactly is the supposed eliciting of dumb, bigoted backlash that Bixen Span's referring to? Because he doesn't really cite any examples of this, and I have not been able to find or see any articles or posts regarding this matter that prove this outburst of resentment to Nyla possibly becoming the first AEW Women's Championship. And I'll tell you why this is concerning for me. Because I was very vocal about my dissatisfaction for Nyla winning the Battle Royal at the pay-per-view. If you want to hear my in-depth discussion about the matter, watch episode 7 of the 5 Starr Wrestling Report. It's right here on the channel. My dissatisfaction had, and still has, nothing to do with Nyla Rose being transgender. I want to make that abundantly clear. I don't agree with her push because there's a high degree of unfairness when it comes to believably buying her competing with other female athletes. Because Nyla has the bone density and the muscle frame of a biological man, she will always have a distinct power advantage over virtually every other woman in that company, up to and including Awesome Kong, should they ever pair them together in a match. And because of my understanding of chromosomal makeup and the biological differences in muscle mass and frame structure from men to women, Nyla Rose being transgender is not the issue. The issue is her distinct and clear power advantage over every other woman in that company. And the problem I'm finding is that we as fans are apparently supposed to be happy about this and cheer for her. Like despite our knowledge of and understanding of biological differences between men and women, particularly in the field of combat sports, we're just supposed to discount that whole matter entirely and be happy for the fact that Nyla Rose is competing against other women despite having a discrete biological advantage. I'm looking at the bigger picture, however. I don't buy the idea of even playing field when I watch Nyla wrestle other women. Does that make me a bigot? Well, according to this article, apparently so. Because of the fact that I was one of the reprehensible bigots that disagrees with Nyla's push to the women's title, that apparently makes me a bad person. This is a continuation of the article. Quote, but the negative element got noticeably louder this week thanks to the inaugural women's title match part. A good deal of this, at least online, trafficked in exactly the generic transphobic insults you'd expect, but there has also been an extra layer of bad faith idiocy. Tweets bemoaning Nyla Rose's inclusion because of fairness and safety. Then he goes on to talk about the events that we discussed earlier where this is apparently taking place at. Again, though, tweets bemoaning Nyla Rose. Where? What tweets? What's the context? Are they truly bigoted comments? Or are they just people voicing their disputes over the fairness and safety issue, which is in fact a problem, mind you? A biological man at well over 150 pounds wrestling a biological woman at well under 100 pounds is a safety problem and is clearly unfair in just about every conceivable way imaginable. So let's not try and pretend that the fairness and safety issue is a cover-up, because it's clearly not. And listen, I will say this very quickly, just to ensure that I'm being fair here in my analysis. If, in fact, there are people out there demeaning Nyla Rose, personally and maliciously attacking her with transphobic comments on social media, which I'm sure there are, those people are evil, they're disgusting, and they should be ashamed of themselves. But for the people such as myself that are more concerned about the competition factor and the issue of a biological man competing against biological women, scripted or not, it's still a thing that will be happening in AEW going forward. And it's still a thing that we as fans are apparently supposed to take seriously. And I think the people jumping to conclusions about bigotry and hate need to pump the brakes and actually read into what people are saying. Like I said, if people are attacking Nyla Rose because she's transgender, that's one thing. That's horrible, it's dehumanizing, and no one in the world deserves that kind of treatment. But if people are genuinely concerned about the unfairness factor and the safety issue of Nyla Rose wrestling other women, let's not automatically jump to the conclusion that those people are bigoted. Maybe they have a point. And, as far as the discussion goes on how do you stop bigotry and chastising from fans, and setting boundaries for events and, preventing things from getting way out of control, I'm going to hit you with some hard truth. And it might suck to hear this, but this is just the fact of the matter. Those fans paid for their ticket. So like it or not, those fans are going to chant for whatever they want, whenever they want, and however they please. If you're an AEW or a WWE or, even to a lesser extent, an ROH, an MLW, even an Impact Wrestling, you can't control what the fans can and can't say. Will they chant some despicable stuff from time to time? Yeah, probably. But come on. Let's be real here. How many wrestling events do you go to or watch where the fans are legitimately out of control and chanting racist, sexist, homophobic, or radical slurs? I mean, I've heard some borderline controversial stuff from fans in recent time, but nothing that openly mocks or discriminates against a wrestler. And I can promise you this, you're not going to hear AEW fans mocking Nyla Rose for being transgender on live TV. You're not going to hear AEW fans mocking Sonny Kiss for being gay on live TV. You're not going to hear fans openly discriminating against wrestlers on WWE or AEW programming in a major capacity. Sure, some wrestling fans are reprehensible human beings that say a lot of mean, ugly crap on social media about other wrestlers. But a handful of losers hiding behind a screen is not going to equate to a prevalent epidemic of bigotry on television. Okay, last thing on the agenda to talk about. This is not an original idea of mine, but it's something that inspired me as a way to interact with new people out there and try to grow this channel in the future. We're still very low on viewership here at the 5 Starr Wrestling Report YouTube channel, and I wanted to do something to stir up a little bit of attention and get people interacting with me going forward. And I thought, well, what's something everyone can have fun with? Something of all age demographics that never gets old. And then it hit me. Who doesn't love an old-fashioned game of bingo? And more specifically, pro wrestling bingo. So here's my proposition. Every week, to close out the show, we'll have a little game of pro wrestling bingo. And everyone can assemble their own card layout of a 5x5 row and column. Everyone can pick 10 of the 20 topics from my list that I will leave in the description box every week. And whoever gets bingo wins They just win for the week. You can claim yourself the undisputed pro wrestling bingo champion. If anyone's really creative and wants to go out of the way, you can design a belt with a logo, and we can defend it here on the FSWR weekly series. Anyway, here is the list of 20 topics to choose from. And again, you can create your own imaginary 5x5 board if you so please. I'm just going to read them all off here. WWE storyline makes no sense. Michael Cole issues random stat to fill dead airtime. LOL Roman wins. Fans chant, "This is awesome," for a match that is merely okay. Vince McMahon clearly rewrites Raw and SmackDown 10 minutes before the show airs. Random wrestler stirs up crap on social media. Fans are quiet for a generic wrestling match. Are you sure I'm not watching WCW? Heels get cheered, babyface gets booed. Jim Cornette calls out outlaw mud show play wrestlers during podcast. Chris Jericho gets more publicity than everyone else. MLW is called Major League Wrestling, but still makes fundamental production errors during show formatting. Selena De La Renta and Conan equals worst storyline of 2019. WWE wrestler watches monitor at a side angle from backstage. LOL Baron Corbin wins. The Fiend is awesome. Wait, Clash of Champions is this Sunday? Yawns at least 15 times while watching Raw. Vince clearly gives up on yet another wrestler from NXT. And last but not least, wrestling fans still believe that Triple H will run NXT on USA. I think that was 20. So there's your list, everyone. Choose wisely. Also, we're going with standard bingo rules here. No four corners, no crosses or X's, no postage stamp or any of those obscure ways. Nah, we're going traditional rules here. You either win horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. And again, I will list everything off in the comments section for Pro Wrestling Bingo so that you can all take a look at the list and you don't have to memorize everything or go back and listen 100 times to catch them all. All right, I think that'll do it for this one. Thank you to everyone that tuned in to listen. Again, make sure you subscribe, comment, and rate this video to help me out. We have uploads on Mondays and Fridays every week. And with your support out there, we can grow this channel and make headway heading into 2020. Take care, everyone, and we will see you on Friday for the review series.